It's delicate. It's unforgiving. And when you cook a perfect piece of fish, it's one of the best things on earth. I put that down to Stephen Hodges. His teaching for me of how to cook seafood. There's nothing better than eating raw, perfect, aged fish.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. The last 2 years have shone a light on how the restaurant model works. The notion that large venues with many seats being turned over a few times a night seems old hat, and a swathe of new operators have been launching into small boutique offerings, minimising food costs, staff costs, and the high rents. The trilogy of pain points for the industry. In that vein, small Japanese restaurants have flourished as our appetite for cuisine from the land of the rising sun develops too. Joel Best is the co-owner of Besuto, soon to be opened in Sydney. Joel, how are you?
Mate, thanks for having me on board.
It's good to catch up with you. You've had quite an interesting couple of years. You sold a business a couple of years ago and avoided a lot of the chaos that a lot of operators have had, and yet you're launching a restaurant still amid COVID. What's it been like for you the last couple of years?
I'm grateful. Would be a word that I go back to quite often. I'm very grateful that I sold my places at the beginning of 2019 and missed the shit show of coronavirus and the floods and the fires that people often forget about that were just before COVID hit. So for myself, it was a chance to recharge. I played a lot of golf. I taught myself some golf, played a lot of golf, and then this little project is more a passion project. I don't need to do it. It's something that excites me, and it's something that I want to eat as well. So reflecting on the last couple of years I'm grateful. Is one word that just comes back to mind all the time.
I want to get into the new venue that'll open soon in a little while. Take us back to when you were young. When did you first get interested in food and realise that chefing might be for you?
It comes back to helping my mum in the kitchen. So I'm the youngest boy of 4 boys. So there's 3 brothers. I'm the youngest. And growing up in a single parent household, everyone had to chip in. So I always found myself in the kitchen, helping my mum out, prepare the meals. And it comes back to that. And growing up with being the youngest, and, all boys were brought home by the police at one stage in their teenage years. The kitchen was a safe place, or used to be a safe place. And when I was growing up, it was a safe place. And, when my brothers were beating me up, I'd run to the kitchen. That's where I'd run for protection when I was young. Run to mum for protection. And when I was older, I'd run to the kitchen to pick up the knife. And I was actually banned from using any chef's knife in my household from about the age of 8 to 14. So it's quite interesting that I became a chef. And, the chaos in the kitchen that, all kitchens are chaotic, or used to be. That was quite familiar for me. And, so it comes back to, I think, helping my mum out in the kitchen.
Do you remember when you first stepped foot in a commercial kitchen and how different that was?
I started working in a deli, in a gourmet deli out at Dural when I was 14. And that was great training. Everything was done properly. All the sauces, everything was followed, all the recipes were followed to a T. And the owner guy, Nusafora, Italian bloke, very hard and particular on the way things were done. And, all through my training, and, whether we go from there, I went to Pier and trained under Greg Doyle and Steve Hodges, who were both, quite notorious for ripping people's heads off for no particular reason. But they were very particular, and Steve Hodges was an amazing mentor in the kitchen, and he was also an amazing mentor to me both in my personal life, but the training that I was given between those two venues, and completely different venues. One being a deli and one being a 2-hat, 3-hat restaurant. But I'm grateful for the experience that I received from both those restaurants and both those venues.
Take us back to the kitchen at Pier with Greg Doyle and Steve Hodges. What did you take from that time? What was some of the positives as a chef that you took out of that?
Oh, the love of seafood. I mean, just the love and desire to produce good seafood dishes. I mean, my first day in the kitchen, Greg tore my head off because I didn't know what wasabi was. I didn't know. It was my first day. I'd never eaten raw tuna in my life. I'd never eaten fresh tuna in my life. I'd only ever had canned tuna. And it was eye-opening. I spent 2 years there, and it was an interesting 2 years. I took a lot of drugs over that 2-year period, so a lot of it's actually blurry. But the training was amazing, and it was ingrained. They ingrained the training into you. And when I was as an apprentice there, I mean, some weeks I'd do 90 hours. I wouldn't go home. I'd just go out and party and come back to work and do it all over again. And, it got to a point where I think it was a Sunday, and I remember getting to work and then have no memory of the whole day until 3 o'clock. And I was like, wow, what have I done for the last 8 hours, 9 hours of work? And that's when it really hit me going, wow, I better lay off the drugs a little bit. And that Pier gave me the passion for seafood. And I love it. I still love it to this day.
When you realised that there was an issue with drug taking, what sort of steps did you take to walk through the door and change things?
Oh, that didn't happen until I was 30. So, that was from 17 when I started at Pier. So that was it was a 13-year ride. I've done 2 stints in rehab at South Pacific Private, which I think has been amazing and is an amazing program. And it really teaches you to look into yourself. And I have the problem with, the word addiction. I don't believe in addiction. I believe addictions are a symptom of an underlying issue. And unless you deal with the underlying issue, those addictions will keep continuing. And whether you swap those addictions from drug to alcohol to work to sex, whatever the addiction is, to overeating, whatever that addiction is, unless you're dealing with the underlying issue, then those addictions will keep coming back. So I find it when people go, oh, that's an addict, or he's an addict, or you're an addict, and I find it really hard to stomach that, because once I dealt with the underlying issue, and my underlying issue was I would suppress all my emotions. I wouldn't want to deal with them, and the easiest thing is to take drugs, drink, work 100 hours a week. So South Pacific was amazing, and it taught me really to look in and go, right, maybe I do have some hung-up issues of my parents separating as a kid and having been abandoned as a child, and it wasn't really till my second stint in 2018 that I went in there that I really was like, right, I need to make some changes. And that's when I decided to sell Bondi's Best, because where the kitchen used to be a safe place, it then became an unsafe place, and it wasn't working for me anymore. And it would make me want to drink and take drugs, and the chaos that a kitchen provided wasn't working anymore. And so I really needed to sit down and go, right, I need to change some things. And, selling the businesses, everyone thought I was crazy. But for me, it was the right time. And for me, it was something I needed to do for myself. And in hindsight, it was perfect timing for the rest of the world. No one knew coronavirus was going to happen, and the whole world would implode, and restaurants would be closed down, and half the hospitality staff would be out of work. Quarter of the hospitality staff would leave, There's a lot of chefs that have left the industry. There's a lot of wait staff that have left the industry.
How did you navigate working with your drug and alcohol issues in kitchens during your 20s and early 30s?
I was good at hiding things, and I drank a lot of vodka, and I think that comes most likely from my influence at Pier and Fish Face, being that double-edged sword. And like no one would know I was half a bottle of vodka through. Like they wouldn't know. And for me, I used to go out and give shots of vodka to the customers, and they wouldn't know that I was already a bottle through. So I was very good at hiding things. No one really knew how bad I was. I mean, I probably bought the lady who owns the bottle shop next door a new house, because I used to buy 8 to 10 bottles of vodka a week, as well as doing cocaine and other drugs. It was, there was no one that there was no one to answer to but myself. And I feel like as a teenager, I didn't really have teenage years. I was always really responsible. I grew up really quickly, and my 20s were kind of like my teenage years. But I had money, and I didn't have anyone to answer to. So, one of the stints in rehab, they make you write up on a whiteboard of, what you probably consumed over the last however many years. And I just did 6 years, and just what I consumed in my restaurant, solely on the premise of my restaurant. And it was close to $500,000. Like, it was frightful. And I mean, do I regret it? No. Did I have fun? Yes. Would I change things? Probably. I don't. Making decisions when you're influenced on drugs and alcohol is not the right thing to do. To make clear decisions in business and in your personal life for relationships, it's really important. You make those decisions from a place of peace and with clarity. And you can't have peace and clarity when you've been awake for 2 days. You drank half a bottle of vodka.
You mentioned your second time in rehab in 2018 really changed things for you. What sort of impact did that change have on you, and what sort of positives came from walking through that door and moving away from that life that was sort of ruining you?
It really came back to making sure I put my needs first. And when you're a chef and you run restaurants, like, you put everyone else's needs first. That plate has to be perfect. And even though it was just a fish and chip shop, we got 13 and a half in the good food guide. But the pressure of putting everyone else's needs first before your own. And so the second time I just realised I've got to start looking at my own happiness. And this restaurant is not serving me anymore. And the relationship I had with the business was not serving me anymore. And so I came out and I was just like, it's time to sell. It's time to have a break, and it's time to reflect, and, now's the time. And that's where, I'm grateful. Because I don't know what would have happened if I had to navigate the last 2.5, 3 years through the coronavirus with 2 restaurants on board. I'd hate to think how I could have dealt with it or would have dealt with it.
What sort of positives are in your life now as a result of this change, and how different are you?
Oh, I've had one drink this year, and that was on my birthday. I had a really nice whiskey and a cigar. But the positives, like, I have an amazing partner, who I connect emotionally with on a day-to-day basis, which is something I've never really had before. I mean, to connect to myself emotion, I connect with myself on emotions, and that enables me to connect to others with emotions. And, she's amazing. She's a great rock, supportive, and I'm super lucky to have her in my life. With my kids, I've got a better relationship with them, and connecting with them emotion. with emotion and teaching them about emotions. And one thing, South Pacific taught me was, how we teach our children emotions. We all grew up, we're men, we all grew up and, you fall over, it's like, don't cry. But you're teaching your children to suppress their emotions. And it's really unhealthy when it gets later on in life. And so being able to develop that emotional relationship with the children is a bonus. And I would never have been able to do it without the support of, going to rehab.
This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW. Amongst this lifestyle that you had for quite a long time, you built a love for and a name for amazing seafood and the ability to hero it on the plate. And tell us about your approach to cooking seafood and what it is that you love about it so much.
It's delicate. It's unforgiving. And when you cook a perfect piece of fish, it's one of the best things on earth. And I put that down to Stephen Hodges. His teaching for me of how to cook seafood and how to, care for it. From dry scale to, storing the special fish fridge. There's nothing better than eating raw, perfect, aged fish. Or cooking it perfectly, where it just sets, where the protein sets in the middle. And I had a discussion with someone yesterday, my therapist actually, and I was explaining all proteins should be allowed to rest after cooking, whether it be beef, seafood or chicken. And he was surprised by this fact. But seafood, when you cook a fillet, the residual heat keeps cooking. So to be able to pull that fish off at the right time, allow that to sit and rest, so the residual heat just sets the protein, and it's one of the best joys of life, I think.
Best seafood was more than a fish and chipper, and was very, very popular. What were some of the great dishes that you're really proud of from that period of your life?
One comes to mind of the Chatham Island blue cod that we got out of New Zealand. We used to just serve with a spicy miso soup. It was phenomenal. And that was a relationship that I, had with the fishermen from Chatham Island. And I'm looking forward to building those relationships again, moving forward for Besto, because seafood is about building relationships. There's very little good seafood that comes through the market, and you need to build those relationships. And I had a lot of good relationships with suppliers. John Sussman being one of them, him very well, and sourcing the best seafood that you can get, and it all comes down to having relationships.
Tell us about those connections and why they're so important. Do you have any experiences of being on some different boats or with different fisheries that have sort of made an impact on your use of that seafood?
Yeah, I actually hate fishing, and I get seasick. But give me a scuba dive, swim with them all day. I would rather someone bring me the fish in. I don't have enough patience for fishing, but I understand the process and what it takes to, to catch a fish and kill it properly and store it properly. And, when it, like in the Icky Jim message, system is important to spike the fish through the brain. And I relate this, when someone goes, why do you spike it through the brain? I'm like, you want to kill it as quickly as possible so it has the least amount of stress. And I relate it to dragging a cow behind a car for 3 hours, and why net caught and hauling fish should be banned. So it's really important that we look after our fisheries, we look after the fishermen that are doing a good job, and we protect Australian waters and New Zealand waters. A lot of good seafood comes out of New Zealand, and they do an amazing job down there. And I think Australia has to pull its game and catch up to how good New Zealand do on a sustainability level, on a quota level, on a research level as well.
You mentioned that you sold your restaurants before the pandemic, and this time you've felt very blessed to not have them during bushfires and floods and the pandemic. What sort of impact has stepping away from the industry had on your cooking and the way that you look at your career?
I now do it from what I want to do, not from a necessity. And so, this new project is, I want to do it. It's a passion. It's not for the money. It's not to work in it 6 days a week. It's just something I want to do and that I'm going to find a lot of enjoyment out of. And it comes down to the joy and passion that's going to come from it. And so understanding, I got kicked out of school as a 15-year-old, as a lot of chefs did. And, working in the kitchen, that was more need. I needed to get a job. I needed to work. I needed to support myself. I moved out of home, from the family home when I was, I think, 16, 17. And so I always needed to work. And so this project, over the last 3 years, it's like the next thing I do, it's going to be out of a want. I want to do this, and I don't need to do this. And I'm going to have a lot of joy from the next project that I do. And so keeping it small and intimate is important, especially for staffing. So my business partners are ex-staff members of Bondi's Best. And we don't need to find any other staff. And moving forward, Australia's going to have a big hospitality shortage of staff, and it scares me. It scares me, and it worries for my friends in the industry, and how much pressure it's going to put on them working more hours, understanding what I've been through in the past. And I just go, where's the support going to come from? And possibly how many chefs are we going to lose? Both from the kitchen and most likely from suicide. It worries me. It really does.
What are some of your favourite memories of Bondi's Best?
Favourite memories? Stripping down to my board shorts at 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a 40-degree day and running down to the beach is one of the best things. I think New Year's Day, it was a New Year's Day, it was 40 degrees, and I called my neighbour down at 9 o'clock and I said, can you look after the restaurant? We're closed, just sit here and have a beer. And all the staff, we went down and had a swim. We'd had a record day. It was 40 degrees. We just all went down and had a swim. The community in Bondi, we had a very loyal following, and the community was always strong. And it was hard for me to go back to Bondi for 12 months, almost 2 years. I felt a lot of shame for selling, and every time I went back, they'd go, they've ruined your place. And I wouldn't want to answer it. I wouldn't want to answer the questions. And I felt shame for selling. And it took me a while to release that shame and accept that I'd sold and I'd moved on.
Tell us about Besto and where did the idea come from, and when did you find the location that was right for this idea?
I think sitting down to an omakase anywhere in the world is a special experience. Whether you're in Japan, New York, Sydney, I think allowing the chef to dictate the menu on what he believes is the best produce of that day is an experience that I think everyone should have once in their life. And a lot of omakases have opened up over the last 12 months. And I had an eye on this location 2.5 years ago. And because of the pandemic, they delayed it a little bit. But I think being in the city is a great spot. A lot of business lunches, a lot of business deals happen over, omakase restaurants or in omakase restaurants. And it's an experience. We've got a Japanese garden. We've built in a Japanese garden in there that you walk through to get to the dining room. And it's just, I take it as you're being invited in someone's house. And it's a 12-seat dining room. Yeah. So I'm super excited, especially just to sit and eat as a customer as well. And I don't have to wait 8 months to get into it. I can go when I want and guide the chef and guide the manager on moving the business in the right direction.
Has there been an omakase experience that's been a real highlight for you that's inspired this project?
I was in Japan last year, just before the pandemic hit in February, when the virus was on the boat, some princess boat off Japan, and me and my partner had a couple of good omakases experience over there, and they were very traditional, but they were amazing. One of the chefs took me through the Japanese fish markets, the new one, one morning at 5 a.m. and took me through to all his suppliers, and it's just the whole process of, you go down to the markets every morning and you go find the best piece of fish that you can for that day, and the best octopus and the best roe and the best umi, and you go back and you carefully prepare it. And those 6 lucky punters at night time are the ones that get to benefit for all that hard work that's been put in through that day.
You mentioned your concerns about staffing as we move forward and society opens up again, but do you think there's some positives to come out of this adversity that can create positive change for the industry?
I find it really hard at the moment to see any positive change. Wages need to go up. Staff, chefs need to get paid more. They need to get treated better. Wait staff need to get paid more and treated better, especially in Sydney. Melbourne's a little bit different. But with these increased wages, the cost of the food is going to go up. So the cost of living in Sydney has increased dramatically over the last 3 to 5 years. And I don't think that we've seen that on the restaurant on a plate. And I feel, over the next 2 years, we're going to see a big increase on food, on the plate of food. And I think it needs to. But within that, rents are high, overheads are high. So the business, I think the restaurant and hospitality industry has to go through a change, and you either move and change with it or you die. And the smaller size restaurants is a good business model. For me, I used to work out my wages on 25 to 30%. This model will allow my wages to be, 15%. And, I can't see. I look around Sydney everywhere, and all these restaurants that are closed, they're never going to reopen. And I just can't see how new hospitality venues are going to go in there. It's frightening. And just the quality of food, the chefs that are going to be working 80 hours a week because there's no one else to cover them. Like, it's extremely worrying. It's really important that we restaff and we open our borders. And we get the backpackers in, we get the tourists in, the tourist visas, the holiday visas, and the tourists. We need to restaff the hospitality.
For someone who's walked through the door and got on top of issues with alcohol and drugs, which are a common issue in the industry, what sort of advice do you have for those looking to step through that door and have some more clarity in their life?
There's never a right time to do it unless it's now. And the sooner you take that step and accept that you have some underlying issues that you haven't worked through, and seek help, seek advice. I'm quite open, and I always have been quite open with my struggles. And I often receive phone calls from people I've never met before, but actually that have seen my Instagram or seen my Facebook. And yeah, there's no better time than now.
As we head towards summer, can you think of a seafood dish that you're looking forward to cooking and eating?
Oh, to be honest, I had a cracking meal from Josh Nyland at Charcoal Fish the other day. So I've still got that in my memory, in my taste buds. Look, his fish and chips are amazing. And I picked up some Murray cod off the charcoals, and I had a yellow curry sauce at home that I made. So it was a yellow curry using his fish. But yeah, just fish and chips from him. Like, I miss fish and chips. And it's really hard to get good fish and chips in Sydney. And it has been for 15 years, which is one of the reasons why Bondi's Best was so successful. I'm happy he's open down the road from me. I can walk there in 2 minutes.
Well, Besto will open soon, and it's the first time in your career that you're opening something that you want to, rather than out of necessity. What are you looking forward to when the doors open?
Sitting down as a patron. Sitting down in a restaurant that I've built and designed, and with business partners, but not be heavily involved in the kitchen. So taking a step back from the chef's side and more sitting down as a consultant and restaurateur, and sitting down and enjoying that experience, and being able to offer that experience to others.
How long until the doors open? What's the plan? I know there's still lockdown in Sydney, but are you ready to go when the lockdown lifts?
Yeah, we should be open by middle of November, end of November. There was a lot of number crunching when I was negotiating the lease. I was lucky that AMP were very slow in the beginning, and by the time they issued me the lease, we were in lockdown, so we had to go back and renegotiate. But there was a lot of number crunching and looking at our vaccine rates every day, and I'd look at it going, oh, okay. And I had a buddy that would guess as well, and so I estimated that we'd be 80% vaccinated by the end of October. So I'm grateful I'm good with numbers, and we've all jumped on board and got vaccinated, so we should be open by middle of November.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot of people very much looking forward to it, Joel, and we've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds to hear just a little bit of your story. No doubt we'll catch up again soon. Please keep in touch. Good luck, and we'll catch up again soon.
Mate, thank you, Huck.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.